Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my Pittsburgh Regionals tier list. Pittsburgh Regionals is going to be this weekend and is expected to be the biggest regional of all time. With the brand new set Obsidian Flames also releasing, it has shaken up the metagame just a little bit as well. But with that being said, if you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let's hop into it. So we have Tier S, which are the absolute best decks in the format. Tier 1, which are amazing decks. Tier 2, which are decks that are solid but might have a couple flaws. And then Tier 3 are decks that could maybe perform okay but aren't necessarily the most powerful decks in the format. And then the fun tier are decks that are fun. So anyways, we're gonna hop into it here, starting with, let's start off with Arceus Duraludon. And now this is a deck that hasn't seen a whole lot of play recently, and I think there's a reason as to why. I think the deck is very, very powerful. However, the metagame is just not right for it. I think it's a good counter deck when, you know, things like Lugia V-Star might be seeing a lot of play. Decks with special energies, you know, are kind of dominating the format. That's when Arceus Duraludon is very powerful. However, with decks like Chen Pao running around, Charizard as well being a brand new archetype that typically does not play special energies except for like one DTE, the deck has kind of started to fall out of favor. And also I think Arceus Giratina is just the stronger arc variant as of right now. So as of right now, Arceus Duraludon will be tossed into the tier 3. Moving on here, I guess we'll try and find one of the brand new decks. We have Charizard. Now Charizard is a deck that has been getting tons of either hype or tons of slander recently. It is a deck that people think is amazing or people think is absolutely horrible. I'm kind of in the middle. I think the deck is strong when it gets going. The board presence is unbelievable. When you get double Charizard set up, you have two 330 HP Pokemon that can pretty much two-shot or one-shot anything in the format, and that board presence is very good. The deck has a lot of good things about it. It has, you know, things like Arceus V-Star that really help out with that consistency. You either have Pidgeot or the Bibarel, which helps out as well, you know, to be able to, you know, consistently be able to pull off attacks. And then Charizard literally powers itself up and potentially one other Pokemon as well with its ability. So there's so many good things that are going for it. However, it's not tier 1 as of right now. I think that it takes a very rough Lost Zone matchup, which is the big problem, along with a pretty difficult Chen Pao matchup as well. I think the deck takes decent matchups into decks like Gardevoir and also Lugia and Mew. However, with Lost Zone decks being so prevalent in the format, I think the deck can struggle to that. But I think the deck is still strong. I just think that it's missing something as of right now, but it's still very, very good. And I think the biggest problem with the deck as of right now is our players aren't necessarily playing the right list. So I think if someone comes up with like that optimal Charizard list, I think they could definitely do very well. Moving on, we got Chen Pao Excalibur. I think this deck is very top of tier 2. I think the deck is very good as of right now, but the only issue holding it back is it's just a massive glass cannon. When the deck works, it's the best deck in the format. It beats pretty much everything. However, that doesn't happen all the time, and when it does, you know, stumble, it can really fall behind against a lot of decks in the format. So when it gets going, it's incredibly powerful. However, can it get going is the question. Moving on here, let's go to Fusion Mew. Fusion Mew is tier 1, still one of the best decks in the format. It's one of the most aggressive decks, has an incredible one prize attacker to disrupt the prize trade in Meloetta, can beat pretty much anything, is pretty okay into things like Drapion, and also Spiritomb has answers to both of those. If they put down Drapion, you can just simply Lost City it away and knock it out with something like Meloetta. If they put down Spiritomb, you're able to attach fusion energies onto things like Genesect, which oftentimes you're doing anyway, so it works out kind of nicely. The deck is just incredibly powerful. Vance Kelly most recently won the World Championships with it. Azul GG just got top 4 as well, you know, kind of just solidifying just how good this deck is, and I think it does deserve its spot in tier 1. Definitely one of the easiest decisions on where I was going to be putting the deck. It's just fantastic. And moving on throughout some of the other decks here, let's take a look into Urshifu Inteleon. Urshifu Inteleon is a deck that has been getting a lot of hype recently, and I think it's deserved. The deck is very good as of right now. It has decent matchups against most decks in the format, aside from things like Lugia and Mew, and really does focus on hitting well into decks like Lost Zone Toolbox decks, and also other things just like Giratina as well. All the Arceus decks, it does pretty good against. It just has good matchups against a lot of the field. However, the only thing holding it back from probably being tier S is that it takes a pretty rough Mew matchup and Lugia matchup. You can attempt to salvage those matchups with things like Giacomo, but I don't think it's worth it because you just make your deck more inconsistent. So I think just focusing on pure consistency and just getting yourself set up every game is really what makes this deck powerful. It has some crazy turns that you can take, you know, utilizing things like Yoga Loop, you know, Radiant Alakazam to move damage around as well, and also Inteleon's Double Gunner. So it has everything that needs to be successful. It can struggle a little bit with consistency, and it's a little bit matchup based, which are the only things kind of holding it back. It's not really a deck like Lost Zone Giratina, for example, that is pretty much has a chance versus everything, and that's why I think this deck is so powerful. I'm going to put this deck at the very top of tier 1. I'm not sure if there's going to be a tier S deck today, but the deck is absolutely fantastic. I think that the deck can beat anything. The only issue that it has is honestly itself. I think itself is the biggest problem. Sometimes it just can't get off the ground, which is something that holds the deck back. However, when you do get set up, it is incredibly powerful and really does have a chance versus anything. You can go into the tournament saying, all right, I don't necessarily beat everything, but I don't really lose to anything either, and that's something that's really, really nice. And it does also kind of have that glass cannon effect that when it does set up well, it's just so difficult to beat. So that's something as well. I personally value, you know, heavier Pokegear in this list, making sure that it sets up as consistently as possible, because if you just find Colress every turn for the first several turns, the deck is pretty difficult to beat. So anyways, we're going to put that in tier 1, probably at the very top there. Moving on, let's take a dive into Lugia. We have Lugia colorless here. I think at this point I'm going to include this deck in the tier 2. I think it's a lot better than people are giving it credit for. I think it takes decent matchups against a lot of decks as of right now. It takes great matchups into Lost Zone Toolbox. Snorlax is a really awkward attacker for decks like Giratina as well to deal with. It's just a solid deck. You know, it's a little bit more consistent, I think, than single strike Lugia. However, its power level is much lower, but you can still take one shots with Weird Ear at some point, you know, towards the end of the game. I know there have been some players that have been seeing success with it in online tournaments, and I would not be surprised to see a couple that made it into day 2. I think it's a lot better than people are giving it credit for. Moving on here, we have let's just do the other Lugia as of right now. Other Lugia I think is tier 1. It's very good as of right now. It takes decent matchups into Tina, Mew, and Urshifu. Does still struggle sometimes the Gardevoir, which is the big problem, and also struggles against itself. It's very inconsistent at times. You oftentimes don't have any control over the outcome of games, which makes the deck very, very, you know, risky to play. You could, you know, pop off and go 9-0 at an event, or you could go 0-4, and there's not, you know, sometimes very much in between. So it is a deck that, you know, I think that is very good when it gets going, and you need to focus on consistency, in my opinion, over playing a bunch of tech cards, in my opinion. So Lugia is very good. It takes decent matchups against a lot of the top decks in the format as of right now. However, the consistency is what probably holds it back from being tier S. If this deck got double Archeops off every game on turn 2, it'd be probably the best deck in format. It just doesn't do that. So as of right now, we'll put it at the bottom of tier 1. I think it's very good, but I don't necessarily know if it's better than the other decks as of right now that are in tier 1. So anyways, moving on here, we have Palkia. Palkia is a deck that has been getting some talk recently. Cyrus Davis, they most recently got 9th place at the World Championships with it. I think the deck's pretty good. I think the deck is probably a little bit worse than Chen Pao just because its ceiling is a little bit lower, where Chen Pao has, I think, the chance to win the tournament if someone just runs incredibly hot with it. Palkia is a deck that you pretty much kind of know exactly what's coming, and it is an incredibly fast deck, which is something that I think makes it a lot better than people give it credit for. What it loses in matchup spread, it gains in consistency, which I think is really nice, which is why I have pretty high regards for this deck. The only issue is that it can sometimes randomly lose the Path of the Peak and stuff like that, which is sometimes an issue. Other than that, though, I think the deck is very, very good. Moving on here, we have Miraidon. Miraidon is a deck that I think is actually much better than people give it credit for. Kind of similar to Palkia. What it loses in matchup spread, it gains in consistency. You're just able to even beat bad matchups just because you hit turn 1 Photon Blaster or turn 1 Raikou, so it kind of fixes some of its problems. So like if you're going against maybe Lugia, which might be a rough matchup, if you just hit turn 1, you can kind of flip that matchup around. So that's something that's pretty cool about the deck, and I think it's a lot better than people think. I think it can beat even things like Lost Zone Toolbox, Mew, Giratina. I think it has shots, you know, against a lot of decks in the format. So as of right now, I have pretty high regards for the deck. I think it's solid. I know Andrew Mahone has been hyping it up. Most recently got top 32 the Tricky Gym, and we also saw Sage and Park as well, a former VGC World Champion, get top 32 at the World Championships as well, with a little bit of a different list than Andrews. I personally like the Judge Path / Iono Path build. I think that's probably the best way to play it as of right now. It kind of plays a little similar to Arctina, where you can just Judge Path or Iono Path and pretty much out of the game. You have a very powerful attacker and energy acceleration. However, I kind of like it more than Arctina because it also has the ability just to outspeed the opponent as well, where Arctina doesn't really have that. So you know, that's kind of where I'm at as of right now with Miraidon. It's not mid, it's actually pretty decent. All right, moving on here. What should we do next? Let's do some of the new decks. These are all fun tier decks. They're cool. I've tried out some of them. However, I don't think they're competitively viable for this tournament. Maybe in the future if we get more cards. I think they could have some potential. Arceus Pidgeot is tier 3. I think that it's really cool. Obviously has Starbirth, being able to search for anything, which is really nice. And then also Pidgeot is really cool, being able to search for any one card once per turn. However, its power level is atrocious. Not being able to one-shot pretty much anything is a problem, and also Path of the Peak can stifle the deck as well. Having weakness to things like Urshifu is also not amazing as of right now, and it just has the problem of getting ran over by a couple decks. So I think it has some potential. I would not be surprised to see one or two in day 2. However, I don't necessarily think the deck is going to go incredibly far. It's kind of a cool deck, but I think its power level is just a little bit too low as of right now. Maybe if more Pokemon come out that become meta that have lower HPs, or maybe there's a card that comes out that specifically works with this deck, then I think it has potential. It has a lot of control over games. It kind of feels like Arceus and Teleon, but the power creep has just gotten so much that I think it's kind of pushed this deck down into tier 3. But it has potential. You know, like I'll say that. It definitely has potential. Arceus Giratina is an interesting deck. I think that Arceus Giratina is good at beginning of formats because players begin trying out, you know, new strategies, new things, oftentimes adding in new tech cards that they might not necessarily should, that just inherently makes their deck more inconsistent. So this deck is a very good consistency check deck. It checks your opponent's consistency with things like Judge, Iono, and Path of the Peak, basically saying, is your deck consistent enough to consistently draw out of these cards? So I do think that the deck is actually decent. I don't think it's probably better than Miraidon or any of these other decks, just because if your opponent breaks through Path, the deck just really struggles to a lot of things. So as of right now, I think it is a tier 2 deck. So anyways, moving throughout some of the other Arceus variants, I think all these other Arc decks are just in tier 3. I think they're a little bit weaker than Arctina. I think Arctina is probably by far the best Arceus variant because it has the ability to one-shot a lot of the things in the format, which is important. Moving on, Dialga. Dialga's fun when it gets going. The problem is that it doesn't get going all the time. So when it gets going, it can be pretty difficult to beat. But yeah, it's, I think, in the fun tier as of right now. Moving throughout some of the other Lost Zone decks. We got plenty of Lost Zone decks to go over. We got Turbo. Turbo, I think, is bottom of tier 1. I think the deck is very good. I guess I could put it above Lugia here. Yeah, I think Turbo is still very, very good. Has decent matchups against a lot of things in the format. Is very good at cleaning up on, you know, rogue decks as well. Turn 2 Lost Mine is absolutely crazy, along with Dragonite being able to take one-shots on turn 1 if you have a strong enough of a start. Overall, I think the deck is very, very good. Has decent matchups against a lot of things. Can struggle to Inteleon and Lugia. However, other than that, its matchup spread is pretty good. One of the more consistent and aggressive decks in the formats, and Lost Zone Toolbox continues to be really, really good. I guess I'll also mention Kyogre in this as well, because there's actually no Kyogre in this tier list. Shout out Zapdos TCG as well for making this, by the way. Make sure to go drop them a follow. But anyways, the Kyogre is, I guess, just going to be kind of looped into like the Turbo. So I think Kyogre / Turbo is probably tier 1. Not necessarily the very top of tier 1, but still very, very strong. So moving on, we got Zoroark. I think Zoroark's not terrible. It is a tier 3 deck. It can beat certain things in the formats, but depending on the typing of what they're playing. The biggest issue that's going to hold Zoroark back for quite some time is Lost Zone Toolbox. If Lost Zone Toolbox didn't actually exist, I think this deck is actually not bad and maybe could move into tier 2. However, Lost Zone just kind of destroys the deck, which is the problem. United Wings is a fun deck, quite fun to play. I know Alex Szymanski and a few other players played it to a day 2 at the North American International Championships. And it's fun. You know, the problem is Lost Box, though. Lost Box is not a very good match. I think their entire strategy was to dodge that deck the entire tournament, along with other things like Urshifu and Teleon the deck really does struggle against. So anyways, Lost Zone Charizard. I think Lost Zone Charizard is a decent deck. I think it's just a solid middle to bottom of tier 2 deck. Sablezard. I was actually most recently on a podcast with Cyrus, who most recently won NAIC, and she was hyping up Sablezard as a deck that actually had a lot of potential right now. I believe her, and I will put it in tier 2. I think it's strong. I've played some games with it in the past. Not having Radiant Greninja is kind of annoying because Greninja is just such a powerful draw support card. But if you do hit turn 2 Sableye, then it's just so incredible because you can set up everything just to be ran over by Charizard at points in the game. So I do think it's actually quite solid. Moving on, we have Gardevoir. Gardevoir is, I think, the second best deck in the format. I don't think there's a tier S anymore. I don't think there's a deck that's far and away the best deck in the format. So I think we'll put that right there as of right now. It's still incredibly powerful, has arguably the best engine in the game with Refinement and Shining Arcana, Radiant Greninja as well, just drawing tons of cards. You have pretty much unlimited power potential. You have an incredible comeback with things like Iono as well. You can, like, you're powerful 1-prize attackers, you're powerful 2-prize attackers. There's just pretty much nothing you can't do. You feel like you have a chance in every single game if you can, you know, map out the line. So the deck is just phenomenal. It just takes decent matchups to a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily beat everything, but doesn't really lose to anything as well. It's kind of like Giratina, where its matchup spread is very 50-50 to maybe slightly favorable, which, you know, is something you have to take into consideration. Something like, for example, Urshifu and Teleon, you play versus a Lost Box deck, you're like, sick, I'm probably gonna have a pretty good time. With Gardevoir, you're like, all right, how do I figure this out? How do I actually, play this matchup out? Like, I have to still think a lot, right? And there are some decks that kind of just sit down versus a matchup and say, all right, sick, it's an auto win, right? So understanding that this deck does take a lot of very close matchups, so the stress level of playing this deck is definitely going to go up for someone. But if you know how to handle it and you enjoy Gardevoir, it's still a fantastic deck, and I definitely would recommend playing it, as I think it's still very, very good. Mewtwo V Union Gardevoir is just worse regular Gardevoir along with Path. I don't even exactly know why the Path is in here. I am just not going to include this, actually. I'm just not going to include that because I'm just going to loop Gardevoir, because I guess just Gardevoir can play Path sometimes too. So we'll just include that into I guess that. So Gardevoir with maybe your Path as well, because I do think Path is kind of cool in the deck. So we'll just kind of leave that off as of right now. Lasso and Goodra, I think, is better than people give it credit for. I'm going to put it at top of tier 3. I almost want to put it at bottom of tier 2, but I haven't done enough testing with it. I think it's not bad. I think if you play Sableye and Zamazenta, you have decent matchups against a lot of things. Zamazenta kind of handles the Chen Pao matchup. Sableye is just a good attacker into a lot of things as well, especially like Turbo. If they Dragonite, you can drop Zamazenta and KO a lot of the damaged Pokemon on their side of the field. It's okay. It's just a little bit slow and a little bit inconsistent, which is the thing that's holding it back. So as of right now, I'll put it in tier 3. Meowscarada, I think, goes into the tier 3 almost fun tier. DT Mew, top of tier 3. If Spiritomb exists, the deck just falls apart, which is an issue. I don't think the deck is terrible. However, I don't think the deck is necessarily just better than Fusion Mew, because Fusion Mew can actually beat Spiritomb and is more and has the chance of taking one-hit KOs on turn 1, which is really nice. So Reggie's is also tier 3. We'll just kind of toss these. I'll note that tier 3 is not entirely sorted, so we're just kind of tossing these other decks. Shadow Rider is probably tier 3. Control decks tier 3. Ting Lu as well, and then we'll put the Sander control deck that I think he played at Worlds in tier 3 as well. So this is the tier list as of right now. Let me know what you think of it. I'm excited for Pittsburgh. I will be attending, and if you guys have any questions in the comments, feel free to let me know. Let me know if you agree, let me know if you disagree. And with that being said, thank you so much for all the support as always. And yeah, if you're looking for a deck, then check this out and maybe you find something that works for you. But that's just my honest opinion. So anyways, with that being said, thank you so much. This is Smart TCG. I'll speak with you again soon. All right, peace out, everyone. Also, good luck to everyone at Pittsburgh. If you're looking to improve your game, I do offer coaching on Metafy. I was ranked in the top 16 ranked players in the entire world, and I know what it takes to reach the next level. I have a free coaching consultation if you're interested in booking that, to kind of figure out exactly what coaching is and whether or not it is something for you. I also have individual sessions, event deck list preparation, replay reviews, training plans, and more. So if you have any questions, make sure to book that consultation if you're interested, and we can kind of go over exactly what coaching is and how it will make you into the very best player that you can possibly be. But with that being said, thank you so much for sticking around. I appreciate it. This is Smart TCG, and I'll speak with you all again soon. Thank you so much for the support. Peace.